At this point in the risk assessment process, we have identified threat scenarios, scored the impact, and now are looking to take those medium and high risks and mitigate them to an acceptable level. Not everything, even high risks, require an immediate let's throw money at the problem until it goes away reaction. We're going to look at 4 alternative ways to mitigate risks. The 4 T's: treatment, tolerate, transfer, and terminate. Treating the risk is the most obvious. We're going to put controls in place to reduce or modify the impact to a manageable level. There are different types of controls for treating risks, but the 3 main controls are preventative, detective, and corrective. Now, preventive controls attempt to stop the event from happening, or at least reduce the likelihood. Some examples include separation of duty and authorization procedures. Detective controls try to identify problems within the process. Though not as proactive preventive controls, detective controls help to discover problems before they get out of hand. Examples include tasks like access control audits and inventory counts. Corrective controls fix problems after they have occurred to reduce impact, and hopefully prevent them from happening again. Think of corrective controls as the quality assurance team that tests and addresses processes. Where do the controls come from? Well, the standard, of course. Annex A paired with the ISO 27002 gives you a good base for treating the risk impact down to a manageable level. All the treatments then get dumped into a risk register and are assigned an owner to help manage. The risk register will identify the risks, treatment, implemented controls, risk owner, and the original scores, along with the new score after the implementation of the control. It is important to note here that it is not enough to just list treatments in a plan. You need to reach out to the other risk owners and explain the responsibilities of managing the risk. Alright, tolerate. Accept and retain as is. A low risk is still a risk, but because the mitigation effort does not justify the results, the business acceptance criteria says we are cleared to accept the risk. Treating and tolerating is covered by the 2 edge areas of our acceptance criteria. Bottom left is accepted by default, top right must be treated by default. Basically, we are working to move all the risks in the organization from the top right to the bottom left. Okay, so we talked about treating and we talked about tolerating. Now let's talk about the last 2 groups. Transfer is for threats where the impact is considered high or medium, but the likelihood is considered low. We transfer the risk to a third party like an insurance company, or we outsource the service. This way the impact of the risk falls on another organization. Finally, terminate. The risk is high, the likelihood is high, there's no clean or affordable way to mitigate, no one will take on the risk for you, so we're basically left with no choice but to reject or avoid or eliminate the process as it is too dangerous for the company. This module has broken down and explained the different parts of the risk assessment process. Again, if your organization already has a defined risk program, we are not reinventing the wheel here. There is no defined way of conducting a risk assessment. So implementing a risk program that meets the standard is based on your needs. What we'll cover here is one way of meeting that standard. This risk assessment uses Excel spreadsheets to manage the assessment, along with the treatment. First things first, define the assets of your organization. That is why we move the asset management piece up to the top. Work with the asset owners and outline threats and vulnerabilities to those assets. In this case, we have defined desktops as assets, with a threat of theft, unauthorized access, and malware. We then rate those threats and vulnerabilities against the defined criteria, giving us our initial risk score. The criteria in question is based on the risk acceptance criteria laid out, a calculated likelihood and impact value. We then mitigate this risk with ISO 27001 Annex A. All the controls from the various categories we will be going over in the following modules. This is important because the standard requires you to tie back risks to controls, and that will lay the groundwork for setting your statement of applicability. Once we have all the treatments to mitigate the risk gathered, we want to set owners around those treatments, notify them accordingly, and although they should already be part of this process at this point, hold them accountable for getting the mitigation in place to take care of the identified risk. Optionally, you will want to pull out the greatest risk and track those critically. You must expect to be asked, what is your biggest risk? Well, here it is, black and white. Items that, even after mitigation, still pose a risk to the organization.